By the time Luna Maeve Hollowmere reached the palace courtyard, the kingdom was already applauding. That was how her marriage ended. Not with a fight, not with a betrayal discovered in secret, not even with a goodbye, with applause. The sound echoed across the royal plaza as hundreds of voices cheered. Nobles filled the balconies. Warriors lined the stone walkways. Citizens crowded every available space, eager to welcome their Alpha King home. At the center of it all stood Alpha King Lucian Thorncrest, tall, confident, beloved, everything a ruler was supposed to be. And for the first time in years, Maeve felt genuinely excited to see him. Her fingers tightened around the folded document in her hand, the Royal Physician's Report, a report she had read 3 times already, then a 4th, then a 5th, just to make certain it was real. Pregnant, after 7 years of marriage, after endless hope, after countless disappointments. Pregnant. The word still felt unreal, wonderful, terrifying, perfect. Maeve had spent the entire morning searching for Lucian. The moment she received confirmation, she wanted to tell him herself, not through servants, not through physicians, not through council announcements. She wanted to see his face when he learned they were finally having a child, their heir, their future. A smile touched her lips as she moved through the crowd. Then she saw her, Celine Viramont. Maeve stopped walking. The woman stood beside Lucian as though she belonged there. Beautiful, elegant, familiar, far too familiar. The crowd whispered excitedly, because everyone knew who Celine was. Lucian's first love, the woman who vanished 6 years ago without explanation, the woman he was supposed to have forgotten. A strange feeling settled inside Maeve's chest. Unease. Nothing more, at least at first. Then, Lucian reached for Celine's hand. The plaza became silent. Thousands of people watched, waiting. Maeve did too. The Alpha King's voice carried clearly across the courtyard. Strong, certain, unwavering. I spent years convincing myself I had moved on. The crowd listened carefully. Beside him, Celine's eyes glistened. Maeve's stomach tightened. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. Then, Lucian smiled at the woman beside him, a smile Maeve hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. And suddenly, everything became clear. I never stopped loving her. Silence. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then the crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the plaza. Cheers followed immediately. Nobles smiled. Citizens celebrated. The kingdom welcomed a lost love home. And standing at the edge of the celebration, Maeve looked down at the report in her hand. The paper trembled slightly. Not because she was crying. She wasn't. Not because she was angry. She wasn't. Because suddenly, every unanswered question from the past 2 years finally made sense. The growing distance, the shortened conversations, the distracted smiles, the feeling that she was sharing her marriage with a memory. The child wasn't arriving into a happy future. It was arriving at the end of something. Slowly, Maeve folded the report. Once, then again, carefully, neatly, as though handling something fragile. The applause continued. Lucian never looked toward her. Neither did Celine. Neither did anyone else. For the first time in 7 years, Maeve understood exactly where she stood. And strangely, the realization didn't break her. It freed her. A small smile touched her lips. Soft, peaceful, final. Then she turned around and quietly walked away. Nobody noticed. Not the crowd, not the nobles, not even the Alpha King. The palace was quiet by the time Maeve returned to her chambers. The celebration still echoed faintly from the city below. Music drifted through open windows. Laughter carried on the evening breeze. The kingdom rejoiced. The Alpha King's first love had returned. Meanwhile, the Luna sat alone. For a long moment, Maeve simply stood in the center of the room. The folded physician's report remained in her hand. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning. The silver curtains, the polished furniture, the crown resting on its velvet cushion, the portrait of her and Lucian hanging above the fireplace. 7 years of marriage surrounded her, yet somehow the room had never felt emptier. Slowly, she walked toward the window. The Capitol glittered beneath the night sky, beautiful, alive, unaware that its Luna was saying goodbye. Her gaze drifted to the reflection in the glass. She looked calm, too calm. Perhaps that was what surprised her most. She should have been devastated, should have been furious, should have demanded answers. Instead, she felt tired, not physically, emotionally, tired of wondering, tired of hoping, tired of pretending she didn't notice the distance growing between them. The truth was, Lucian's announcement hadn't broken her heart. The heartbreak happened long before today. Today's revelation merely gave it a name. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her maid, Clara, stepped inside. "Your Grace." Maeve turned. The young woman immediately frowned. "You missed the celebration." Maeve smiled gently. "Apparently." Clara hesitated. "Are you all right?" The concern in her voice was genuine. That nearly hurt more than everything else. Maeve crossed the room and placed a hand over Clara's. Yes, it wasn't entirely a lie. She wasn't all right, but she would be, eventually. The maid seemed unconvinced. Yet after a moment, she nodded and quietly withdrew, leaving Maeve alone once more. The silence returned. This time, she welcomed it. Then she opened her wardrobe. Not because she wanted a different dress, because she had made a decision. The realization felt surprisingly peaceful. No dramatic declaration accompanied it. No tears. No anger. Just certainty. One by one, she began packing. Simple clothing. Practical shoes. Travel supplies. A few treasured books. Nothing extravagant. Nothing royal. Everything she placed into her travel bag belonged to Maeve. Not the Luna. Not the Queen-to-be. Just Maeve. The distinction mattered. Hours passed. The palace gradually fell asleep around her. Servants retired. Guards changed shifts. Candles burned low. By midnight, most of the kingdom dreamed peacefully. Maeve remained awake, finishing. The jewelry stayed behind. The ceremonial gowns stayed behind. The expensive gifts remained untouched. Even the Luna's crown stayed where it was. Those things belonged to a life she no longer wanted. Only one item accompanied her. The physician's report. She slipped it carefully into her bag, then rested a hand against her stomach. A tiny life, a tiny future, one that suddenly depended entirely on her. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it strengthened her resolve. The child deserved certainty, not confusion, not competition with a ghost from the past, not a father still publicly declaring love for someone else. Maeve lowered her gaze, then smiled softly. "We'll be all right." The promise was quiet, yet absolute. Before dawn, she stepped into the corridor. No guards stopped her. No servants questioned her. No dramatic farewell awaited. The palace slept through her departure. The kingdom remained blissfully unaware. As she crossed the final gate and disappeared into the darkness beyond the Capitol walls, the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon. Behind her, thousands celebrated the return of a lost love. Ahead of her waited something unknown, something uncertain, something entirely her own. And beneath her heart, she carried the secret that would one day change everything. At first, Lucian didn't notice Maeve was gone. That fact would haunt him for years, not because he didn't care, because he had become accustomed to her presence. Maeve was always there, always handling problems before they reached him, always smoothing conflicts before they became crises, always standing quietly beside him while he focused on larger concerns, like air, like sunlight, like something so constant it became invisible. 3 weeks passed before he realized something was wrong. The first sign appeared during a trade meeting. A dispute between two merchant guilds had escalated unexpectedly. Normally, such matters never reached the throne. Maeve usually resolved them long before then. Lucian frowned as advisors argued across the council chamber. Finally, one exhausted minister rubbed his temples. Has the Luna reviewed these proposals? The room went silent. Several people exchanged glances. Lucian frowned. No. The minister's expression tightened. That explains it. The comment irritated him. What exactly does that mean? Nobody answered immediately. That, alone, should have concerned him. Instead, he dismissed it. The meeting continued. The dispute remained unresolved. 2 days later, another problem emerged. Then another. Then 5 more. Village leaders requested guidance. Charity networks stalled. Regional negotiations suddenly collapsed. Everywhere Lucian turned, someone asked the same question. Has the Luna approved this? The repetition became increasingly frustrating. By the 4th week, even he couldn't ignore it. One evening, he summoned the chief steward, a patient man who had served the palace for decades. Lucian barely sat before asking, "Where is Maeve?" The steward blinked, surprised. The reaction unsettled him. "You don't know?" Lucian frowned. "Know what?" A long silence followed. Then the steward lowered his gaze. "Her chambers are empty, Your Majesty." For a moment, Lucian simply stared. The words didn't make sense. Empty? What did that even mean? Maeve occasionally traveled, visited villages, inspected projects. None of that was unusual. The steward swallowed. "She left nearly a month ago." The room suddenly felt too small. Lucian rose immediately. "What?" The older man flinched slightly. "Her personal belongings are gone." A cold feeling settled in Lucian's chest. Impossible. If Maeve planned a journey, she would have informed him. Wouldn't she? The uncertainty arrived instantly, followed by something worse. Doubt. Minutes later, he stood inside her chambers. The room looked immaculate, orderly, clean, empty. The wardrobe held only ceremonial clothing. Jewelry remained untouched. Royal gifts sat exactly where they belonged. Everything valuable remained. Everything personal was gone. Lucian slowly crossed the room. For reasons he couldn't explain, panic began creeping into his chest. Because this didn't look temporary, it looked final. A knock interrupted the silence. The royal physician entered, pale, nervous, carrying a sealed envelope. Lucian immediately noticed the man's expression and knew, whatever this was, it wasn't good. The physician stopped before the desk. His hands trembled slightly. "Your Majesty." Lucian stared. "What is it?" The physician hesitated, then placed the envelope down. "The Luna instructed me to deliver this only if she disappeared." The words hit like a physical blow. Slowly, Lucian broke the seal. Inside rested several documents. Medical records, examination results, official confirmations. His eyes moved down the page, then stopped. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. Pregnant. The word blurred before his eyes. He read it again and again. The date sat at the top of the report. His stomach dropped, because he recognized that date immediately. The same day Selena returned. The same day the celebration happened. The same day Maeve vanished. Memory crashed into him without warning. Maeve, pushing through crowds, searching, looking for someone, looking for him. Suddenly, he understood. Not a possibility, not a suspicion. The truth. Maeve hadn't come to the plaza to celebrate. She hadn't come to watch. She hadn't come to say goodbye. She had come to tell him they were having a child, and he never even saw her. Lucian didn't sleep that night. or the night after, or the one after that. The physician's report remained on his desk, folded, reopened, read repeatedly, as if staring at the words long enough might somehow change them. It never did. Each time, the same truth waited for him. Maeve had been pregnant. Maeve had come looking for him. Maeve had left alone. The realization followed him everywhere, into council meetings, into diplomatic discussions, into every quiet moment when his thoughts were free to wander. And unfortunately, his thoughts wandered constantly. For years, Lucian believed he understood his marriage. Not perfect, not passionate, but steady, reliable, permanent. Now he wasn't sure he had understood it at all. The kingdom certainly hadn't, because once word spread that the Luna had vanished, questions multiplied, then concerns, then outright panic. Lucian expected people to ask where she went. Instead, they kept asking something else. What happens now? The question seemed strange at first. Then he began discovering why. One afternoon, a council advisor arrived, carrying 3 binders, trade records, regional agreements, charitable distributions. Lucien reviewed the documents, then frowned. Why are these here? The advisor looked confused. Because the Luna normally handles them. The answer unsettled him. Another advisor arrived later, then another. Each brought responsibilities. Maeve quietly managed community projects, merchant disputes, village aid programs, agricultural planning. The list never seemed to end. Every day revealed another piece of the kingdom operating, because Maeve made it operate. The discovery should have impressed him. Instead, it devastated him. Because he hadn't known. Not really. He benefited from her work, relied on it, expected it, without ever recognizing the extent of it. The realization felt increasingly ugly. Meanwhile, Celine noticed the change immediately. One evening, she found him alone inside the royal library. The same physician's report rested open before him. Again, her expression softened. "You've been reading that for weeks." Lucian didn't answer. Celine crossed the room slowly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she sighed. "You're looking for her." The statement wasn't a question. Lucian stared at the report. Yes. The honesty surprised both of them. Silence settled between them. Then, Celine smiled sadly, a smile carrying more understanding than resentment. "I think you've been looking for her long before she disappeared." The words lingered after she left, because deep down, he knew she was right. The problem wasn't that Maeve vanished. The problem was that he finally noticed the space she occupied after she was gone. Months passed. Search parties traveled throughout neighboring territories. Merchants received descriptions. Allies were questioned. No trace, nothing. It was as though Maeve simply vanished from the world. Then, months became years. The kingdom adapted. People always did. But Lucian never stopped searching. The physician's report remained locked inside his desk. The one reminder he couldn't bear to discard. 5 years passed. Then, one autumn morning, a merchant vessel arrived from the western coast. The captain requested a routine audience. Nothing unusual, at least until Lucian noticed a familiar name buried inside a trade report. Maeve. His heart stopped. The document described several fishing communities transformed by a local leader. Trade routes expanded. Profits increased. Infrastructure improved. The name appeared repeatedly. Maeve, Maeve, Maeve. Every success seemed connected to her. Lucien read the report 3 times, then stood so abruptly his chair nearly fell backward. The merchant blinked, confused. "Your Majesty?" Lucian barely heard him, because for the first time in 5 years, he finally had a direction, a location, a chance. The realization hit with terrifying force. Maeve wasn't lost. She wasn't hiding. She was living, building, thriving, and suddenly, nothing in the kingdom felt more important than seeing her again. The western coast looked nothing like the capital. Lucian noticed that immediately. Gone were the towering palace walls and crowded noble districts. Gone were the elaborate ceremonies and endless political games. Instead, the sea stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Fishing boats dotted the water, seagulls wheeled overhead. The salty breeze carried the sounds of merchants, sailors, and hard-working families building lives with their own hands. It was simple, honest, and somehow it felt more alive than the kingdom's heart ever had. The journey took nearly 2 weeks. By the time Lucian arrived, the stories had already spread far ahead of him. Every village seemed to know the same woman. Not Luna Maeve, not Queen Maeve, simply Maeve. The name carried affection wherever it was spoken. The first person he questioned was an elderly fisherman repairing nets near the harbor. The man immediately smiled. Maeve? Lucian nodded. The fisherman laughed. You'll have to be more specific. The answer surprised him. There are many people here named Maeve. No? The fisherman grinned. But around here, everyone talks about our Maeve. The possessive pride in his voice felt strangely personal, as though the entire coastline had collectively adopted her. Lucian spent the day traveling between villages. Everywhere he went, the stories remained the same. Maeve helped organize trade routes. Maeve secured fair prices for fishermen. Maeve established schools. Maeve negotiated shipping contracts. Maeve settled disputes before they became feuds. Maeve, Maeve, Maeve. The pattern felt painfully familiar, because it was exactly what she had done in the capital. The difference was that people here noticed. They appreciated it. They spoke about her openly. No one took her contributions for granted. The realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. By sunset, he reached the largest harbor on the coast. The marketplace bustled with activity. Children darted between merchant stalls. Sailors unloaded cargo. Families gathered near the docks, and at the center of it all stood Maeve. For a moment, Lucian forgot how to breathe. 5 years. 5 years since he last saw her. Yet he recognized her instantly. She looked different, not older, lighter. The constant weight she once carried seemed gone. Her smile came more easily now. Her laughter sounded genuine. The sight hurt more than he expected, because he realized something almost immediately. She was happy, not surviving, not enduring. Happy. Then, movement beside her captured his attention. A child, a small boy, darted through the crowd carrying a wooden boat, perhaps 5 years old, dark hair, bright silver eyes, laughing as he ran toward the harbor. Lucian froze. The world seemed to narrow. Every sound faded. Every thought vanished. Only the boy remained. The resemblance struck instantly. Not subtle, not uncertain, obvious. The child looked exactly like he had at that age. The same eyes, the same smile, the same stubborn determination visible even from a distance. The realization hit with brutal force. His son, their son, the child he never met, the child he never held, the child whose first words he never heard, the child whose first steps he never witnessed, the child who grew up without him. 1,000 missed moments crashed into him all at once. Birthdays, bedtime stories, scraped knees, nightmares, victories, failures, memories that should have belonged to him, gone forever. The little boy laughed again and ran toward Maeve. She immediately crouched to his height, smiling, listening, present. Everything Lucian should have been, everything he wasn't. The pain felt almost physical, because no apology could recover 5 lost years. No regret could restore them. No amount of wishing could change what happened. Then the boy turned. His silver eyes met Lucian's across the harbor, and for the briefest moment, father and son stared at one another. The little boy tilted his head, curious, unaware that a single glance had just shattered a king. Lucian stood motionless near the edge of the harbor. The sounds of the marketplace faded into the background. The sea breeze, the merchants, the sailors unloading cargo. None of it mattered, because for the first time in his life, he was looking at his son. 5 years. 5 years of absence compressed into a single moment. The child's silver eyes were unmistakable, the same shade that stared back at Lucian from mirrors his entire life. The resemblance felt almost cruel, a living reminder of everything he missed. The boy shifted the wooden boat beneath his arm and continued watching him, not fearful, not cautious, simply curious. The innocence hurt most of all, because the child had no idea who he was, no idea why a stranger suddenly looked like he could barely breathe, no idea that the man standing across the harbor had spent years regretting a single afternoon. Behind him, Maeve noticed the silence. Her smile faded slightly. Then she followed her son's gaze and froze. The distance between them wasn't great, yet somehow it felt enormous. 5 years, thousands of miles, countless choices, all standing silently between them. For several seconds, neither moved. Then, the little boy tugged gently on Maeve's sleeve. "Mom?" The simple word broke the spell. Maeve blinked. Slowly, she rose to her feet. Her expression remained calm, far calmer than Lucian felt. The child looked between them again, confused, then back toward Lucian. Children often sensed when something important was happening, even when they didn't understand why. This seemed to be one of those moments. Maeve rested a hand lightly on her son's shoulder. The gesture looked instinctive, protective, natural. Lucian felt another sharp stab of loss, because she had spent 5 years becoming a mother, and he had missed every second. The realization arrived in relentless waves. He wasn't there when Rowan was born. He wasn't there for the first smile, the first laugh, the first step, the first day the boy spoke a complete sentence. He wasn't there when Rowan fell and scraped his knee. Wasn't there during fevers. Wasn't there during birthdays. Wasn't there for any of it. The boy's entire childhood existed inside stories he would never get to experience firsthand. A strange grief settled inside his chest. Not for something lost, for something never possessed at all. Finally, Maeve spoke. Her voice carried easily across the distance. Lucian. The sound of his name nearly unraveled him, because she said it without anger, without bitterness, without resentment, just recognition, and somehow that felt worse. He took a cautious step forward, then another. Rowan immediately moved closer to Maeve, not frightened, simply seeking familiarity, seeking the person he trusted most. The sight was perfectly normal, perfectly reasonable, and unexpectedly devastating. Lucian stopped a few feet away, close enough now to see details. The freckles across Rowan's nose, the way he gripped the wooden boat, the curiosity shining in his eyes. Every detail made the reality more tangible, more painful. The little boy looked directly at him, then asked the question Lucian had feared from the moment he arrived. "Mom." Rowan pointed toward him. "Who is he?" Silence. The harbor seemed to pause around them. Maeve didn't answer immediately. Neither did Lucian, because there was no simple response. Not after 5 years. Not after everything. The boy waited patiently, completely unaware that his innocent question carried the weight of an entire lost future. And standing there beside the ocean, Lucian finally understood the true cost of the choice he made years ago. His son wasn't angry with him. His son wasn't disappointed. His son wasn't resentful. His son was a stranger. And there was no punishment more painful than that. For a moment, no one answered Rowan's question. The harbor continued moving around them. Merchants unloaded cargo, fishermen mended nets. Children chased one another between market stalls. Life carried on, completely unaware that a king's greatest regret stood in the middle of it. Rowan looked from Maeve to Lucienne and back again, waiting, patient, curious, the way only children could be. Maeve gently squeezed his shoulder, then crouched beside him. Her expression remained calm, steady. "Rowan," she said softly, "why don't you go show Aunt Clara your new boat?" The boy frowned, clearly sensing there was more happening than he understood. "But, please." The gentle firmness in her voice settled the matter. After a moment, Rowan nodded reluctantly. He glanced at Lucian one final time, then ran toward a nearby warehouse where several familiar adults stood watching from a distance. The moment he disappeared from sight, silence returned. A very different silence, one filled with history. 5 years of it. Maeve rose slowly. Lucian found himself unable to speak. Not because he lacked words, because there were too many. Apologies, explanations, regrets. None felt sufficient. None felt useful. Finally, he managed the only thing that mattered. "I'm sorry." Maeve looked at him. The expression on her face was unreadable. Not cold, not warm, simply tired. The kind of tiredness that came from carrying something for too long. "I know." The answer surprised him. Not because she accepted the apology, because she sounded as though she'd already heard it 1,000 times inside her own head. The ocean waves crashed softly against the docks. Neither spoke for several moments. Lucian struggled to reconcile the woman before him with the one who left. She looked stronger now, more certain, as though somewhere along the way she had stopped waiting for someone else's decisions to shape her future. And perhaps she had. His gaze drifted toward the direction Rowan had disappeared. The ache returned instantly. "He's incredible." Maeve's expression softened slightly. A mother's expression. Pride, love, joy. Yes, the single word carried everything. Lucian swallowed. "I missed everything." This time, she didn't answer immediately, because there was nothing to argue. Nothing to correct. The statement was simply true. Eventually, Maeve nodded. Yes, the agreement hurt, yet somehow it also felt deserved. For years, he imagined finding her, imagined explaining, imagined making her understand. Now that the moment had arrived, he realized understanding was never the issue. Maeve understood perfectly. She always had. That was part of the problem. Lucian lowered his gaze briefly, then forced himself to continue. "I looked for you." Maeve smiled faintly. "I know." The response startled him again. "You knew." She laughed softly. A familiar sound, one he hadn't heard in years. "Lucian, you're the Alpha King." A pause. "People talk." Fair enough. The answer left him feeling strangely foolish. Another silence settled between them. Not hostile, just cautious, as though both understood they were navigating fragile ground. Finally, Lucian asked the question that had haunted him ever since opening the physician's report. "When you left?" His voice faltered. Maeve waited, patiently, the same way she always had. Lucian took a slow breath, then continued. "When you saw me in the plaza that day." The memory flashed through his mind. The applause. Celine. The celebration. Everything. He met her eyes. For perhaps the first time since arriving, genuine vulnerability appeared in his expression. "Why did you smile?" The question hung between them. Simple, yet somehow heavier than every apology. Maeve looked toward the ocean. The setting sun painted the water gold. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled again. The same smile. The one that haunted him for 5 years. And when she finally answered, Lucian realized the truth would hurt far more than silence ever could. Maeve watched the ocean for a long time before answering. The harbor had begun to quiet. Fishing boats returned for the evening. Merchants closed their stalls. The golden light of sunset danced across the water. Beautiful, peaceful, nothing like the storm quietly unfolding inside Lucian. Because somehow, after all these years, one unanswered question still haunted him. Why did she smile? Not cry, not scream, not confront him. Smile. The memory followed him for 5 years. That calm expression, that quiet acceptance, that final look before she disappeared from his life. Maeve folded her arms loosely. A cool breeze lifted strands of hair around her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. I spent years wondering. Lucian remained silent, listening, the same way he should have listened years ago. Maeve's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. At first, I thought it was just insecurity. A small laugh escaped her. Not amused, reflective. Then I thought maybe I was imagining things. The words felt dangerously familiar, because he knew exactly what she meant. The distance, the hesitation, the conversations left unfinished, everything that slowly grew between them. Eventually, she continued, I started asking myself a question. The harbor seemed quieter now, as though even the sea wanted to hear the answer. Maeve turned slightly toward him. Her eyes held no anger, only honesty. I kept wondering whether I was your future. A pause, or simply your present until something better returned. The words struck harder than any accusation, because deep down, he knew there had been moments when she felt exactly that way. Moments he ignored, moments he dismissed, moments he never realized mattered. Lucian lowered his gaze. Shame settled heavily inside his chest. Maeve continued, I never asked you. Another pause. I never demanded reassurance. The sadness in her smile returned, because part of me was afraid of the answer. Silence stretched between them. The confession felt painfully human, painfully real. Lucian thought back over their marriage. All the times she tried starting conversations, all the times she seemed uncertain, all the moments he reassured her with actions he assumed were enough. Apparently, they weren't. Or perhaps they stopped being enough long before he noticed. Then, Maeve finally answered the question, the one he came all this way to hear. The day I arrived at the plaza, her hand unconsciously rested against her heart, exactly where she once carried Rowan. I thought I was bringing you the happiest news of our lives. The image shattered him. Maeve, running through the palace, holding the physician's report, excited, hopeful, searching for him, only to arrive 10 minutes too late. The regret felt unbearable. Then she smiled sadly. And instead, I got my answer. Lucian closed his eyes, because suddenly he understood. Not intellectually, emotionally, completely. The smile wasn't happiness. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't strength. It was closure. Years of uncertainty ended in a single moment. The applause, the declaration, the public choice, everything became clear. She finally knew where she stood. And once she knew, there was nothing left to fight for. When Lucian opened his eyes again, Maeve was watching the waves, calm, certain, at peace, a peace he spent 5 years trying to understand. Now he finally did. The devastating truth settled over him. He hadn't lost Maeve in the plaza. He lost her long before that day. The plaza simply revealed it. The distance, the silence, the moments he failed to notice, the questions he failed to ask, the reassurance he failed to provide. None of it happened overnight. A marriage rarely breaks in a single moment. More often, it breaks quietly, one missed conversation at a time, one unnoticed hurt at a time, until eventually one person stops hoping things will change and starts walking away instead. The realization hurt more than anything else, because it wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, And by the time he recognized it, Maeve had already built an entirely different life. The following weeks passed differently than Lucian expected. For years, he imagined finding Maeve and somehow fixing everything, apologizing, explaining, convincing her to return. Reality proved far more complicated, because some losses couldn't be repaired by words, only acknowledged. And for the first time in his life, Lucian understood the difference. He remained on the western coast longer than planned, not as a king, as a father, or at least a man trying to become one. The process wasn't easy. Rowan viewed him with cautious curiosity. Nothing more. There was no dramatic reunion, no instant bond, no miraculous connection, because relationships couldn't be built from blood alone. They required time, trust, presence, things Lucian should have offered years earlier. One afternoon, Rowan challenged him to a race along the harbor. Lucian lost, spectacularly. The boy celebrated like he'd conquered an entire kingdom. Maeve laughed so hard, she nearly dropped the basket she was carrying. The sound lingered in Lucian's memory long after, not because it reminded him of the past, because it belonged to the present, a present he was finally learning not to take for granted. Slowly, Rowan began asking questions, simple ones at first. Where Lucian lived, what kings actually did all day, whether royal guards ever got seasick. The answers led to conversations. The conversations led to trust. Not complete trust. Not yet. But enough. And for now, enough was a gift. Meanwhile, Maeve continued exactly as she always had. Working, leading, helping, building. The coastal villages flourished beneath her guidance. Merchants sought her advice. Community leaders respected her judgment. Children followed her through the streets. She belonged here. The realization became impossible to ignore. One evening, Lucian stood overlooking the harbor as the sun disappeared beyond the sea. Maeve joined him quietly. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence felt comfortable now, not strained, not painful, simply honest. Finally, Lucian smiled, a small one. I used to think losing you was the worst thing that happened to me. Maeve raised an eyebrow. And now, he looked toward the village, toward Rowan, toward the life she built. I think taking you for granted was worse. The answer surprised neither of them, because it was true. Maeve leaned against the railing. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and summer. For a moment, they simply watched the waves. Then she smiled. Not the smile from the plaza, not the smile of closure, a different one. Lighter, peaceful, the smile of someone who no longer needed answers. Years later, historians would remember Alpha King Lucian Thorncrest's reign. For many reasons: trade expansion, political reforms, military victories. Yet one story survived longer than all the others. The story of the Luna who walked away, not because she stopped loving, because she finally stopped waiting. Children learned the lesson in schools. Parents repeated it to their daughters. Advisors repeated it to future rulers. The strongest people are not always the ones who fight hardest to stay. Sometimes they are the ones who quietly leave when they finally understand where they stand. Maeve never demanded to be chosen. She simply refused to remain where she wasn't. Lucian chose his past. Maeve chose her future. And by the time he realized the difference, she was already living it. Perhaps that was the real lesson. Not that love can be lost, but that love must be chosen. Again and again, every day. Because certainty is a fragile thing, and the people who seem most likely to stay forever are often the ones strong enough to walk away first.